Uh, We want to get this study session underway, results-based funding, which should be a very interesting topic. And just to let you know that I've already talked to Dr. Vesely about this, and 92% of the money is now being placed into my personal account. What's so funny? Okay. Dr. Vesely.
Good evening, President King, distinguished members of the board, and guests. This evening, I would like to introduce our distinguished panel of principal representatives whose schools actually qualified for the results-based funding, and they're going to talk a little bit through the statute. We came together as a team when we first got the notification from the state of which schools were eligible, what the statute was all about. We got together as a team. And I will say up front that I am so proud of your work. So they're going to present their work, their great thinking, and their suggestions, because what was most important to us is that we did something significant with this funding to build teacher capacity throughout the district, and I think that's what they're going to speak to. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lisa Connor.
Really? Is the light on? Okay. Can't hear it.
You don't work for Verizon anymore?
Another microphone, please. Something's unplugged.
There we go.
Sorry, your time is up.
I'll break out in Dankeschön. You better watch it. Good evening, President King, Dr. Vesely, and members of the board. Seated in front of you are almost all of the 9 schools that were lucky enough to receive the results-based funding. We were able to come together, meet, and have a little bit of a conversation about what that money looked like and how we would like to spend it. I am speaking for everybody when I say that we had a long discussion and really talked about looking for ways that we could make sure that all Kyrene teachers could benefit from these monies. You know, many of us who are sitting here at the table have been a part of Kyrene for a long time. We're long members of the Kyrene organization, and so looking for ways that we could continue that and make sure that everybody could benefit. So tonight, some of us will be presenting portions of the PowerPoint that we have for you, and to just kind of talk through with you kind of what our thinking was. To start off with, really, we wanted to talk first off about some of the eligibility requirements that come into play when you're talking about results-based funding. There are 2 different ways that schools could become eligible and receive either $225 per student or the $400 per student. And as you can see, we've kind of bolded really that section where all of our schools fell. We had fewer than 60% of our students who are enrolled who meet the free and reduced lunches, as well as the second portion, which is bolded for you there. We were all in the top 10% of all schools statewide, and demonstrated that our students had passing scores in both mathematics and language arts. Once we moved upon, after that, we saw that we were going to meet that $225 per pupil. This is what the funding looked like then per school across the board. So you can see the individual amounts that each award amount would be for each school. Waiting my 7 seconds so you really get a good, look. As we moved on, we really had to, obviously, as always, there are rules and regulations around how you can spend that money. And so we took some time and really made sure that we understood what we could spend the money on, and how the award could be used for each of our schools. Some key highlights that I would put on this slide would be just that we were, there are pieces of you needed to directly enhance, expand, or replicate what was happening at sites that generated the school-based funding. That a majority of the money should go for student salaries, to hire teachers, and for teacher professional development, as well as there was the other piece of portions of it could be used for replication or expansion at school sites.
Thank you, Lisa. And as the statute outlines, we all have a clear understanding of what the words enhance and expand mean, but replication is really something that we need to highlight within this slide. And that's making sure that we are providing opportunities to add students. And by doing that, it's really referring to hiring teachers and being able to use resources at different locations to improve that achievement level. So again, we're trying to replicate our efforts at other school sites. It could also mean mentoring other schools, and that would be the leadership of our schools, meeting with our other colleagues to replicate, to provide the same type of work that we've done in our buildings, and then physically expanding to other locations. The other thing I want to point out is at the very bottom of the slide, it does indicate to all of us who are seated here at the table that in order for us to maintain this level of funding for each individual school that's listed on that previous slide, is that we have to maintain or show steady improvement for a period of 3 years. So the individuals that you see seated here today before you, representing the different schools, that team of principals may be looking different after the spring 2018. I would say that most of our colleagues that are seated here will probably say, absolutely not, Anna. We are all going to be here next year, and that's our goal.
Thank you, Anna. The next slide talks about, we really talked about how can we spend this money then? What can we do with it? And there were two different ways to look at it. How can we access this so that everybody can benefit from this? So one of the options we looked at was the first one with professional development. That would be for all teachers in the district, probably in the summertime or during the weekend. So it's a different time, it's not on contract time. And really talking about getting someone significant as a speaker that would continue the work that we're doing to speak to what it is that we're already doing. And it's, again, it's across district so that everybody's getting the same message. So we were thinking possibly about Bambrick Santoyo, thank you, my apologies. The books that we're doing right now are Get Better Faster and Driven by Data. So those would be perfect ways to just, again, enhance the work that we're doing. Teachers would get their daily rate of pay. And then we would get meals too that would go along with it. That's a huge bonus. Or the other option is the curriculum work and looking specifically at the 9 schools, using those nine schools. Really, it's about 200 teachers, and those 200 teachers would be working summertime, doing some curriculum work, getting 5 to 10 days of teacher rate of pay to do that curriculum work, and then that work would then be passed along or shared with the rest of the district. And again, using some of the money to help pay for the meals for that. So those are the two different ways that we were looking at how could we potentially use this money within the 9 different schools or as a whole, looking at that money as a whole.
As Darcy mentioned, one of the 2 options there was looking at the professional development model. The group decided, or was really looking at different cost options for what getting a well-known speaker to be able to come in and share his or her work does cost money. And so cost analysis was done. I'm not sure by whom, but it's right up here for us here. And as you can see, there are different costs based upon whether we choose a 1-day, a 2-day, or a 3-day option. One thing that anyone who's been in education knows that it's a pretty bare bones model, and there's times where we want to really make something feel professional. We want to make our teachers feel valued, and that's why we were looking at trying to really provide a very upscale experience for our teachers to make sure that they know not only is the work that we're doing extremely important, but we want them to be taken care of when they're doing that work. So you will see those three options up there. Again, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, and still looking at the likes of Bambrick Santoya to be able to come in and do that work.
And as Darcy was sharing with you, one of the other options that we looked at was curriculum work. And so here was the breakout that we looked at for possibilities for curriculum work. So as we talked about there were two options, and we were really looking for a way to ensure that all Kyrene teachers would benefit. So that's really that professional development component where all teachers would benefit. But then we were thinking about what is another way that we can make sure that those 9 schools also receive some of that benefit as well for their hard work. And so looking at that curriculum work component was really that piece. And so we were trying to find a way that those 9 schools and their teachers could benefit from the results-based funding as well. And this would allow them some time to work on curriculum. That could be based off of, the curriculum guide, backwards design, trying to just make sure that, the things that we're doing in our building, that we could replicate then across the board. We also had the discussion that, there may be the possibility that not all of our schools, not all the teachers in all 9 schools would opt to participate. And so there could be the potential to open that up to then other teachers across the district who might be interested in contributing to the work as well. So these are really our 2 scenarios that we have, and we believe that these scenarios and a combination of them would actually really benefit our students first and foremost, but then our teachers, of course, based off of the money. And so kind of based off of that information, we would really like to make a recommendation to the board about implementing a hybrid model solution that would combine those 2 that we were just sharing with you in the monies.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate the short presentation. So we can now ask all the questions we want to ask. Since nobody's lit up yet, I'll start. I want to go back to slide 2, if you don't mind. I want to make sure I understand. I'm sorry, it's slide 4. I'm on page 2, but slide 4. I want to make sure I understand what these 4 points are that the statute is saying. So is there something, are all 4 of these points in the statute in the same place? Or are they scattered throughout the statute?
We have Jordan here, who's available to speak to this.
I knew I'd get him to that table somehow.
Is it on?
Oh, it works.
It's working. This is all a new statute that was added this year. The provisions here are all part of the subsection C of ARS 15249.08.
Okay. Are they listed like they are shown there? Or are they separated by other things in between?
It's a long
It's
paragraph.
a compilation. Okay.
but-
So then my next question is this, because this talks about a lot of different things. The first paragraph is, the money shall be allocated directly to enhance, expand, or replicate the school site that generated the results-based funding. So that's really the key point in that one. The next one says the majority of the monies received from the fund, which is not clear what majority means in that, by a school district or charter holder shall be used for teacher salaries, to hire teachers, and to provide for teacher professional development. So I guess my question is, do all 4 of these points apply, or do you find the one that applies the best and use that one? It's not clear to me if they're all inclusive or if they're individual on themselves.
I would say they're all inclusive. You have to meet all of these requirements.
Okay. So how, in your proposal then, how do you propose to affect teacher salaries, hire teachers, and provide for teacher professional development? Because all I saw in there was the professional development. I think the salary is covered by the 3 extra days that are paid. That's the salary part. What about the, to hiring teachers?
We also believe that, having an opportunity, if we have new teachers, to be able to use this as a recruiting tool as well in terms of the hiring of new teachers, that we are walking into this professional conference where they'll be compensated for that work is one recruitment strategy. And Lisa, I think did you have another comment?
Well, I was just going to say that I believe when we read it, we were looking at it, and obviously we had a lot of discussion and went to a lawyer to be sure that we were using the money appropriately. So I see that as an or, I did not see that as an and.
Well, it says and so that's what you have to go by. You can't imply the word there, so it's an and. So, and then on let's see, slide 5. At the bottom of that slide, schools receiving funding must show steady improvement after 3 years. So in other words, is this 1.2 million the amount that we're going to receive each year for a 3-year period?
No, it is not.
Okay, it's a
It's
one-time.
just for this
A
year.
one-time thing, and then over 3 years, you have to demonstrate that. Does that mean that we're up for it again after 3 years? Or are we up for it every year?
We don't know. We have a belief that it may be available for this year's achievement, which is really last year's achievement once it's identified. But the school letter grades had a big impact in terms of some, I think, future stipulations in terms of who will be eligible for this funding. That guidance hasn't been provided to us yet. But the only thing we can count on is what we have right now.
Okay, so then my last question, I'll let you guys speak. My last question is this. So we get $1.2 million this year for this. We're going to give the teachers 3 extra days. Is that just for this a one-time thing? Yes. Okay, all right, thank you. I'll start with Mike.
Thank you. Couple questions. My first is, how do you replicate like a gifted program or a special ed program? And I'm not sure, I'm just asking the question, I don't know who to address it to, but getting
Well,
back to
it
this
wasn't a
replication.
program per se that caused the effect, but really the overall school, in terms of all students' performance at the school, the overall aggregate performance fell into the top 10% of the state, if that makes sense. So it wasn't based on a programmatic effect necessarily.
Well, that would lead me kind of to my next question. Do we need to gather data on the 9 schools and figure out what they did so we can replicate it? Is there some way we can do
Well,
that?
I'll let the principal speak to this, but we began to ask them those questions in terms of what were some of the commonalities amongst the schools. And I know personally, in terms of my school visits, I saw some common practices. I mean, one of them was their professional learning communities, but the use of data to really drive the conversations of those PLCs. And I think that was something that was very consistent amongst the performance at these schools, is their use of data to really understand what kids had learned, really analyze that data, and then make plans for next steps in terms of how to address the needs of learners. Lisa?
I would also have to say that our 90-day plans were really driving what we've been doing. And so based off of those 90-day plans is really, I'm going to speak for Sierra and say that, we really feel like the things we've been doing inside our 90-day plan all revolve around instruction and instructional strategies. And so those are some things that I believe that if they're replicated, other schools would find to be successful.
Can we look at slide 7 real quick? I'm having a little heartburn looking at the breakfast and lunch costs for each of the, I mean, a one-day conference is $41,000, 2-day conference is $83,000, a 3-day conference is $125,000. I mean, that's like 3 teachers we could hire. I'd rather do that, or Michelle's volunteered to do brown bags for everybody, right?
That's awesome. I think we were just trying to find ways to be respectful of people's time, also provide them with meals during the
Would that be a per
workday.
diem, though, generally, or would it be at
It's
a
the hotel costs for a conference.
I can speak to that a little bit. That is based on modeling at the Mesa Convention Center. So you can see the facility fee is very low there because to do a full-day conference, you would have to have a catered meal for breakfast and lunch. So it's really the totality of all three of those pieces would be the cost of the facility for the day. But we were pretty conservative. There's different levels that you could have modeled that off of. They have different options. We chose the midpoint, so it could deviate a little bit based on what you wanted to do for a selection. And it's also, yeah, it's also based on a per teacher, and we have about 1,000 teachers modeled in there.
One last question, and I appreciate the options you put together. Is there an option out there that, and I'm just asking the question to ask the question because I candidly don't know the answer, but to say, hey, the top 9 schools did these 5 things. These are their, or 3 things. Pick, these 3 bullet points or these 5 bullet points. We're going to go out to, I don't want to use the word the bottom 9 schools, but 9 schools that need more growth or more improvement in that area. We're going to help them implement these goals and then mentor through a mentorship. I mean, is that kind of an option under this? Is that something we can look at, in addition to professional development and those
Certainly, and
sorts
I
of
think
things?
part of what we're trying to do in terms of that curriculum work is to go back and to embed practices into those curriculum guides, through the guidance of these schools, to further enhance and strengthen the curriculum. So that, in effect and in theory, is what they're proposing to do.
Yeah, I mean, in the private sector, we would say, hey, the top 9 producers, guess what? You're taking care of the lower 9, and we're going to, formulate a plan and a strategy. And so I'd like to see maybe something where we're spreading the best practice. I mean, I know Kyrene does it on a constant basis, but really look at, these superstar schools and what we can do to help out some of the others that, need some help. So, thank you.
Michelle?
Thank you. Whoops. So I actually had a lot of the same questions that Mike had, and my first one really was, did you guys talk about what were the things that kind of stood out? And I imagine it's not a thing, but it's probably multiple things that you were able to identify. You're all nodding your head, so I imagine that you sort of have that list. And so my question is, does everybody in the district need this one thing, this one-day thing or one 3-day thing? Or do we need to better tailor some of these things that you've done and try to replicate them in places that might need one or more of those particular things, but maybe not just need this kind of, I think about 1,000 people in a room for a day or 3 days, and yes, that's interesting, and hopefully you leave with some takeaways. Is it going to have the same effect as drilling down to a school or a few schools and doing something more targeted? And is that something that you guys discussed at all?
So in terms of the conference, and you all can speak to that, so you can see how we have padded the expenses of the guest speaker, because in theory, it wouldn't be just one pathway. That what we would do is create pathways. For example, a part of the experience for primary teachers might be the teaching reading effectively, to really have an opportunity to do some professional development in teaching reading effectively, but to create pathways for different groups and for different grade levels that would really be an experience that would really support instruction at their level and their content area. So there could be different pathways. We just started putting down some generic information, but now the next steps would be now going back and really creating these pathways and these opportunities for teachers to have a more differentiated approach. I think there would be some things that would be great for people to get snippets of, but that doesn't mean that they're going to spend 3 days with the same person in the same room doing the same thing. I think this provides us with a real flexible opportunity.
Okay, I appreciate that clarity because that didn't come across to me. So I do think that really targeted approach, where maybe some of those other sites have the opportunity to kind of look at their own information and say, gosh, if we could do this and get some support, that would really help us. I also, I like the idea of the curriculum work, and I wondered if you had considered, you want to value those teachers at those 9 schools who did the work, who earned the money, but if part of our job is to then replicate, what if we partnered them with people from some other schools in that curriculum work, so that now they're working side by side, the people who've been doing it and been quite successful, with maybe some schools where maybe they haven't gone into that work as much, and now it would be an opportunity to kind of work on that replication through that work, and if that would be something that you would consider.
And I don't think we disagree with that. I think we know that across the 9 schools, not every single teacher is going to take the opportunity or have the same desire, right, to do that. And so I think it does allow for that opportunity to allow teachers from other places and other schools to participate in that.
Okay.
Yes.
And then just a little math earlier today, and when I look at the 3 days, and it's 11% for, food and facility and guest speakers, which, when you're talking about, what is it, 1.2, 1.1 something million, that's a big chunk of money. And I wonder if now that we have identified some, quality PD people within our own confines of Kyrene who are dynamite and really know the work of Kyrene, if maybe some of that PD could be delivered from within, instead of the cost of kind of going out to, this level. I don't know. It's just, again, I'm really kind of throwing out more ideas, and I'm watching you as when you're like doing this or this, as to whether it's like things you talked about or maybe things you hadn't considered. I'm really kind of throwing out things to consider, because I always like to see that money going to teachers. And I wonder if as I read this, it doesn't say work for money, it says salary. So you could, in effect, give money to teachers, correct, at those 9 schools, without having them come in for a day or do additional.
And I think
work?
I would go back to that comment that we've all kind of sprinkled throughout our presentation, in that we really would like for all teachers to benefit, and that's been I feel like that's a long-standing piece, and it was one of the first things I think that got said in our meeting as we talked about it, and that we're very excited, and we do want to recognize our teachers, and we were trying to find a way to do that inside of this, as well as benefit everybody.
And I would also say that we have great teachers at all of our schools, and so we don't want to dismiss or disregard our teachers at any of our schools.
And I'm not suggesting that we would. I'm just trying to get clarification on what the rules are. Yeah, for sure. Let me just review my questions really quickly. Okay, I think that's it. I would mostly like to know more about the specifics about the things you talked about that you think were the key things that might be things we would replicate in other places. Thank you.
Bernadette.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate that you all work together on this. Again, that lends a lot of credibility when things are being brought to the governing board. One of the obvious components that I feel obligated to point out when I look at this eligibility requirements is equity. And can I ask a question just to clarify for the audience that would be watching? Did any of our schools get the $400 per student count? Okay, so to me that shows where you've got 60% or more that are enrolled in free and reduced lunch, and you're meeting those numbers. So what I see is I'm looking at, and this is something that's been going on in this district for a long time. I've had a lot of teachers that are working at some of the lower socioeconomic schools that, again, when I look at this list, when people are asking, well, what are some of the additional, what are they doing different? Well, maybe those teachers aren't doing anything different, but it's the parents at home are spending a lot of money at Mathnasium down the street. And there is home tutoring, and there are parents at home with these kids helping them do their homework, where I know that we have campuses where we don't have that level of parental support. So, you know, again, it becomes about equity to me when I look at the demographics of some of the schools that are listed. And again, I am not saying for one second that you don't all have the best teachers and you're the best leaders and all of the above, but I feel that, you know, when I looked at this, and I haven't, and I had, you know, we'd met with KEA, I hadn't read all of the components, which, you know, I'll definitely need to dig a little deeper in. But to me, when I read, you know, fewer than 60, because it comes down to the eligibility of students, and then schools performed in the top 10%. And then because I know our community, I look at the list of schools, and I think, you know, I used to have teachers that were at another middle school say, why does this middle school always get the money when we're really working to close the gap? So I don't see the growth. And that's a concern to me in some of what I'm looking at in the model. So when we talk about replicate, well, it takes money to have additional tutoring at home, if that be part of the model. And again, how are we going to get the data to show that? That probably doesn't exist. And so I appreciate what Michelle asked in the respect of what would those conferences look like. And if we could be given, you know, some sort of very targeted components of what, you know, again, like if there are schools or pockets of kids where we can actually close the achievement gap and we can give professional development for some of those areas, that would be great. If you are a teacher who really wants to learn how to do some, you know, just so we have, it's just like when we go to a conference and we can kind of pick, but I think it would be something where you would work with your teams again, if that's the model that's chosen, that every principal would work with their teams to help select what it is that they need based on what is being provided. So that's, you know, my first question was to clarify that no, none of our schools received the 400. The equity is the other great concern that I had. And, you know, I think when we're looking at AZ Merit data, that to me is just a snapshot. And there's so much more to what we do at every one of our campuses. So, you know, I see some holes in this funding method. I appreciate that we're getting some money here. But I do want to read and make sure, and Jordan, you know, we'll depend on you a lot to make sure that we're in compliance with whatever choice we decide on. So, thank you.
Kristen.
Just so if I can clarify for
Oh, sorry.
the members of the board, both of these plans were run through my office. I've had a look at them. I think they do comply with the requirements of the statute, putting the majority of the money to teachers through salaries or professional development. The money that's going to go outside to replicate will meet the requirements of the statute regarding replication and best practices in introducing that on a district-wide basis. So
I think that the sticking issue for me was about the additional teachers, but Dr. Vesely explained it. And if you believe that that meets the intent of the statute, then I think we're okay.
I do. I think this is right in line with what the legislature and the governor were thinking.
Real quick, Jordan, could you reach out maybe to another legal at another district and see if they're willing to, you know, I mean, just
I've already
bounce,
done it.
just to make
I
sure.
have done that.
Okay.
And I think every district is doing something very different because there was really no specific guidance around the specificity. And in talking with probably 15 different districts, there's probably that many different plans in terms of what they're doing. There was a really big variance in the choices because, again, there was not
Okay, let's get to Kristen first.
Oh, okay.
Well, Jordan, you actually answered one of my questions just now. I want to go back to Michelle's point about can the professional development be provided from within. I actually really like that idea. I think it's good to have leaders within the district shine and provide and show those leadership skills to other employees in the district. But I was wondering, is there a date that we have to make a decision by that's defined by state statute?
There's no clarity in the statute about when a decision has to be made. There's not even actually language in the statute that a plan has to be approved by the governing board, but in talking about it with the administration, I said, you're spending a lot of money, you should get governing board approval for what you're doing. But no, this statute it was written fairly quickly and without a lot of detail.
Okay, thanks.
Obviously, no school board member is on that committee that wrote the statute, right? Okay, Mike, you were up again, but should I pass to Bernadette? Okay.
So one of the other components that I think is very important to doing something system-wide is that I would hope that your all goal with the district would be that every school, that we would go from 9 to 14, that we would go to 16, that if you're all benefiting, then we really all have a vested interest in each other. And so, however that's going to look, that if there are specific things that you're doing at your schools, I'm sure we see great things across many of our schools. And so I would think that doing something that, again, was equitable to all of the sites would then put you all really on the same team. And not that you're not now, but again, I've felt that dissension between different schools where, it's based on really truly the demographics when you have some of, the most amazing teachers that are doing their very best, but they're not getting the accolades that they deserve because of the AZ merit scores. So that was just something I thought was important to note. And then, when we've had in the past one-time funding, we've done things like a one-time stipend, or, I see this as so much more because if we're actually doing professional development that is specific to, again, a targeted, like teaching and reading it effectively, or something in math. And again, I think that's the part that we as a board, well, at least I would want to know, what are you thinking? And I would have to agree with them. If we do have some leaders in the district, that would be a great way to showcase. So maybe there's, that ability. But again, thank you all for working together.
Mike?
Bernadette, just to piggyback on that, kind of took one of my follow-up questions, but is the idea on the professional development to, is it like an ASBA conference where there's, a main session and then breakout sessions? And I just asked this question. I'm doing continuing education personally for the business that I'm in. And there's some really relevant and intriguing courses, and there's stuff that nobody goes to, and it's, totally irrelevant. And so to get the most bang for our buck with this money that the legislature has given us, I really think we should ask the teachers what they want to see for professional development. I would think that maybe some of the math interventionists, or they might want to get a, whatever the hot new math, topic is, and so forth and so on. So I just want to be, as we go down that PD model, make sure that it's something that there's nothing worse than having to sit through something you're not interested in and not getting something out of. So that was my comment on that. My other thing is, Dr. Vesely, maybe you and Jordan could ask AEA what they think, just as far as compliance goes. We might just want to shoot an email, kind of paper the file, just to do that. My last question is clarification. So with the teacher salaries, is that district-wide? Is it just to the site that they're proposing? Is it some hybrid in between? Is the teacher salaries just part of the PD.
Yeah, it's the compensation that would be associated with the conference and/or the curriculum work.
Okay, so, but again, there would be no, out of that total, nothing that you could break out. I'm just asking the question, but some formula, 80-20 or something that goes specifically to a school? Or is the goal to be inclusive and include all the teachers in it?
Well, I think that's why we pulled the whole team together from the very get-go to say, you know, what do we want to do? And what's our approach? And unanimously, they, hands down, said that they wanted to do something important that was going to build capacity throughout the district, but that it was going to be for all teachers and available for all teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, you know, listen, there's some celebration that needs to go on for 9 schools to get this. I think that's pretty doggone great, so congratulations to you all. And the second thing I would say is kudos to you for having the team spirit that you do to understand what it takes to build a strong school district, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much. We will reconvene at 7 o'clock.